Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, well, so in this episode, I thought I'd try to say something about a very famous quote that comes from the French philosopher and thinker Albert Camus. This is what he said. He said, "The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world." Wow, that sounds pretty dramatic, right? So, what's it all about? Well, let's just jump right into it. Okay, so when Camus talks about the absurd, what he's basically saying is that we humans live in an inexplicable and irrational universe. A universe that's completely indifferent or deaf to our call for meaning or for transcendence. In other words, we humans are the sorts of beings that inherently insist that things make sense to us. We want more than anything for the world to be rational and to be ordered and to be just. But here's the thing. The world is simply not the sort of thing that can fulfill our demand that it make any sense to us, says Camus. And actually, this isn't hard to see. I mean, doesn't irrationality and disorder often pervade our lives? Don't the wicked often prosper and the innocent suffer? And don't we all set goals ultimately destroyed by our deaths? So all of this, at its most basic, is what Camus calls absurdity. Again, it's the futility of a search for meaning in an incomprehensible and meaningless universe. It's what arises out of the tension between our desire for meaning and order and the indifferent natural universe's refusal to give us that. Okay, now here's the thing. What Camus is ultimately interested in, and I would say that this was his life project actually, is how we go on to react to the recognition of absurdity. There are different ways in which humans deal with it. And for Camus, it turns out that there are better and worse ways of doing this. So let me begin with the worse ways. Okay, so for Camus, there are essentially two negative responses to the recognition of absurdity. Ones that Camus absolutely does not endorse. And he has names for them. He calls one physical suicide, and he calls the other one philosophical suicide. Okay, so let's begin with physical suicide. So for Camus, one response that people have to the recognition of absurdity is, well, it's to kill themselves. After all, if we're not around to ask for meaning, then there is no confrontation with the world, right? There is no longer any absurdity. Okay, but like I said, Camus doesn't endorse this. Suicide is not the right response to the recognition of the absurd. And that's because to commit suicide is basically to collaborate with death. It's to willingly move towards death. It's to accelerate its occurrence. But for Camus, the right response of the one condemned to death is to desire life all the more intensely and to keep it going as long as possible, despite its inevitable outcome. It is not to go gently, but to rage against the dying of the light, to quote Dylan Thomas. In other words, the answer is to fight or to revolt against death. So it turns out that for Camus, the mythological Silenus is wrong when he claims that it would have been better not to have been born, or if we are unfortunate enough to be alive, to die as soon as possible. And so is the pessimist Schopenhauer when he claims that to be born is a crime and that suicide is a reasonable response to life. No, on the contrary, one must, as Camus says, maintain fidelity to the light and welcome life even in suffering. After all, of course life is marked by suffering and malevolence. But we must remember that it is also graced with great beauty. Okay, well, the other unacceptable response to the recognition of absurdity is to commit philosophical suicide. So what's that? Well, for Camus, this is to leap into religion or philosophy or mythology in a way that affirms, with unjustified certainty, an ultimate meaning or rationality or intelligibility to the universe. Or it's to put one's faith in an afterlife. In such cases, instead of removing yourself from the world, as in physical suicide, you remove the world that offends you, the meaningless one, the real one according to Camus, and you replace it with a much more agreeable one which reconciles yourself to it, one which gives to your existence, including your misfortune, some overall sense and meaning and justification. But, to quote John Lennon, there is no heaven and no hell, there is only sky. Needless to say, to commit philosophical suicide is just fraudulent, according to Camus. Like physical suicide, it is simply cowardly. Okay, so these are not the right responses, according to Camus. You don't put a stop to absurdity by killing yourself or by taking sanctuary in the security of a faith. So, well, what is the right response for Camus? Well, basically, it's to look at life lucidly. And lucidity, that means looking at life candidly and honestly, in the clear light of the day, and not in a way clouded or prejudiced by our meaning structures or wishful thinking or faiths. It means that we try to be as true as possible to what we actually experience and not assume any more than what is given to us. And when we do this, we are choosing to stay within the absurd and not escaping or seeking refuge by committing, as I have mentioned, either physical or philosophical suicide. So, what lucidity means, in other words, is that we are honest with ourselves and choose to see clearly and to acknowledge what is ultimately our very frustrating and tragic situation. But here's the most important thing. For Camus, even though we must acknowledge our tragic condition and live without hope, we still have to refuse the oppressive and tragic aspects of the world. And so ultimately, the best and the right response to the absurd is not some kind of submission or inaction, but it's to revolt. Bye for now.